had fled to France aboard an American Air Force jet. They waved homemade flags, blew car horns, and cheered freedom for their native land. Some say Duvalier's departure means they can now go home. Police sectioned off an area in the heart of Little Haiti for a day-long party that is expected to draw thousands.
Duvalier rose to power at a tender age on his father's death. Oppression eased somewhat under his rule, but the wealthy dictator was feared and loathed by the impoverished nation, as was his father before him. This is the man they called Baby Doc. This was his father, Papa Doc. The elder Duvalier, a country doctor, had been elected president of Haiti in 1957. He declared himself president for life in '64, and when he died in 1971, passed on the title to his son, Jean-Claude. The new Haitian president for life was 19 years old. Baby Doc Duvalier ran the country with a slightly gentler fist than his father. The feared Tonton Macoots, the plainclothes secret police who kept people in line for Papa Doc, got new blue uniforms under Baby Doc and were called Volunteers for National Security. Still, they were stationed in virtually every little hamlet and armed with submachine guns. Only last March, the human rights group Amnesty International said union leaders, journalists, and political opponents continued to be singled out for torture and execution. Violence and repression are not new to Haitians. From the time Columbus discovered Hispaniola in 1492, there was oppression. When the Spaniards had run out of natives to mine gold there, they imported slaves from Africa. When the French took over later, they brought in more slaves. These were the ancestors of most modern-day Haitians. With an average per capita income of $380 a year, small wonder Haitians in recent years have used every ploy they could devise to get into the United States. U.S. policy toward the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere has been marked by frustration. Foreign aid to the Duvaliers has gone who knows where. Accountability in the government has been all but non-existent. Why Jean-Claude Duvalier caved in as soon as he did is not clear. He did still have his army and secret police to enforce almost whatever he chose to decree. But the bigger question today is, what's next? Will there be any changes in Haiti? Will the new junta pay any more attention to the nation's poor, that's most of the people, than its predecessors? Will the United States play an effective role in stabilizing Haiti at last, after nearly 500 years? Joining us now with some information that may help point the way to answers to some of those and other questions, CNN correspondent Larry Woods, who returned from Haiti just over a week ago.
Well, the situation that we found roughly 5 or 6 days ago, of course, is altogether different from what's going on right now. But when we arrived in Port-au-Prince, it was more or less in a state of confusion. The store owners had closed. The working class were not sure where they were going next. There was a great deal of tension and fear in the city. And it really was more of uncertainty than anything else. Because, you know, at that time, 1 week ago, we had put out, we meaning our government, had put out the story that Duvalier had in fact defected. And, of course, that set everything in motion.
What was the difference, Larry, did you find among the people who lived in the capital as opposed to the majority of the population?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I think that can be demonstrated by some footage that we took while we were there. We left Saturday morning and headed up to Gonaives. That's the hillside town where most of the rebellion had started. We had to go through something like 20 roadblocks. Here, this fellow right here was rather anxious not to let us through, but at every stop, we were given a minor lecture about what the needs were and what the problems were in this country. These are peasants. These are very, very poor people who almost subsist off of the land. They live in a city that is, in a country that's the most impoverished in the world, and yet they're constantly, as you see with this young lady right here, begging for anything that can be given them. As I said, we had to clear roadblocks and, of course, ran into the enthusiasm of the new rebels flying their new flag, incidentally, the blue and red flag. On the back of all the buses and places throughout the city, you would see the words ABA, A-B-A, and that, of course, was the front runner of the information to that stood for Down with Jean-Claude Duvalier. We went through the small little community of St. Marc here. And of course, the roadblocks were again in effect, and we had to detour until we got out into the countryside. As I said, we were making our way to Gonaives, hopefully to talk to officials there and kind of get the feel for the countryside.
Larry, excuse me, why was there a roadblock to keep you out of St. Mark's?
Well, the peasants were not letting anyone through but journalists and people that they considered friendly to their cause. At this particular time, it only happened to be journalists. This young man, for instance, right here, I think sums it up. He was saying the one thing that we want more than anything else is food and a job and, you know, and clothing and housing. Something that they haven't had, obviously, and probably in that young man's lifetime. They were also extracting tolls, I might add, what little they could get from people, but they did not require anything of the American journalists. They were happy to see us there. As a matter of fact, we ran into this one group here. It almost took on a sort of Mardi Gras atmosphere. But there again, you see ABBA, Down with Duvalier. I was struck by the youth of the demonstrators. You know, they were kids, and obviously they have nothing to lose by confronting this. This young man right here was fascinating. He was 27 years old. He could speak a little English, but he told us, we want help from the outside world. We want the Western powers to help us, and we will be glad for anything they do. But if that is not forthcoming, he says we will turn to Russia or Libya. And when he said that, of course, the people in the crowd there cheered. We finally made our way into the military headquarters and was summarily told that we had to go back, could not travel in that country without authorization, which we knew in the first place was a risky sort of thing.
Larry, I feel there's a tie of sorts between this and the other third world situation we're watching today, the Philippine elections. We heard on a report last night that the poorer among the Filipinos are in many cases forced to sell themselves cheaply in many different ways. Did you see evidence of that kind of desperation and frustration in Haiti?
Well, I saw poverty like I've never seen before, and I was struck by the fact that everybody that tried to approach us, kids, senior citizens, everybody else, were talking about how hungry they were and that they didn't want money. They wanted freedom, and they wanted to eat, and they wanted a place, you know, to live in decent kind of atmosphere. That was a reoccurring theme. Of course, they haven't had that, and it's not likely that they will get that anytime soon.
What would you say, Larry, if you were to look ahead at the future of the secret police, whom we referred to before, and what might be their fate now that there is a new power in power?
One gets the impression that the Tonton Mancoute, as they are known, or the boogeymen, they hold, I think, the immediate key to some semblance of order around there. But you see, they, as we all know, they outnumber the military 2-to-1, something like 15,000 of them on that island. But I do know that the attitude of the average person there is that they want the military to, you know, keep the Tonton Mancoute from, you know, as a buffer. I think it was best described by our guide and interpreter, and he was pretty well informed about the ways of the city. And I asked him, where's the military in all this? And he says, the military is with the people, you know. He says, but, he pointed to me, he says, but keep this in your heart. And he didn't really want that kind of information laid on him or to spread it around. But right now, one has to assume that there is going to be bloodshed in the very immediate future, because there's an awful lot of vengeance about to happen, I'm sure, in this country, because the Tonton Mancoute have murdered an awful lot of people. And if the average Haitian feels like that they now have a chance to strike back, I sense that they will. How the military is going to cope with all this, I think, is going to be one of the key issues in the weeks and days ahead.